probably have to wait for people to get out of the lunch keynote.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Oh. Mm. Excellent. Yeah. Just give everyone another minute or so to get in, and then we'll get going. Okay, so yeah, you ready to start?
I am ready.
All right. Hey, everyone. This is Sarah Tingsalvola, and I'll be running the sort of tech side of this presentation. I think you probably all know how this whole thing works by now, but just a quick recap before we get started. You can tell me if you're having any tech problems using the chat. There will be 20 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes of Q&A. Please keep it family friendly and civil, you know. And when it comes time to ask questions, you'll have two ways to do that. You can either do it by raising your hand, in which case I'll let you come on video and ask your question, or you can put it into the chat box. Don't use the Q&A tab, just either the chat box or raise your hand. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Michael Motley of the One Mic Black History Podcast.
Wow. Thank you, guys. This is great. So yeah, I can't wait to answer questions. I'm looking forward to answering a few questions after my talk, but I'm going to go ahead and get started because we're on a time limit. So 1962, at a rally at Merriman College, Huey Newton and his fellow student Bobby Seale first met. They quickly became friends, and the pair had their first serious political experience at the Afro-American Association and the Revolutionary Action Network. They soon both became dissatisfied with their teaching, and Newton felt that they were heavy on talk, but ultimately offered the community no solutions. So they split from these groups in search of a new path. Newton and Bobby knew they had a problem, but they didn't yet know what the solution was. So in late 1966, the UC Berkeley chapter of the Students for the Democratic Society decided to hold a conference on Black Power and invited Stokely Carmichael. The conference program featured the logo of a Black Panther for the Lauderdale County Freedom Organization. And Newton took notice of the bold logo and their courageous organizing. And he suggested that they use a panther for their own organization. And with that in mind, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale decided to form the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The Black Panther Party was initially dissatisfied with the failure of organizations to directly challenge police brutality and appeal to brothers on the block. So Newton and Seale had an idea that they would distinguish the Black Panther Party from the multitude of other Black Power organizations, and they would stand up to the police. Inspired by Robert F. Williams' Armed Resistance to the Ku Klux Klan and his book, Negroes with Guns, Newton studied California's gun laws extensively and decided to patrol the police and monitor for incidents of police brutality, but they would do so with loaded weapons. It was nuts. It's nuts. Over the course of several months of patrolling the police, the Panthers had gained a small following, but their actions had sparked the community's interest, but many weren't quite ready to join the Panthers. However, the awareness of the Black Panthers grew rapidly with Oakland Police Department and the California state government. On May 2nd, 1967, the California Assembly for the Committee of Criminal Procedure scheduled to discuss the Mumford Act, which would make public carry of loaded firearms illegal. The Black Panther Party decided to send a delegation to Sacramento to protest the bill, but this delegation was going to be armed. May 2nd, the delegation arrived in California Assembly chambers and they barged into the Assembly floor, followed by reporters, but were quickly ejected. See, the Assembly sessions were open to the public, but public was not allowed on the Assembly floor. Once they were out in the hallway, the state police surrounded them, grabbed them and their weapons and reviewed the situation, but decided that the Panthers had broken no laws, so they returned their guns. A short time later, the Panthers got in their cars and headed back towards Oakland with the contingent of police following them, who decided to arrest them and then charge them with a felony of conspiracy to invade Assembly chambers. Now, the group will plead to a misdemeanor of charges of disrupting a legislative session, but their actions had other consequences. Because of their armed presence, the Mumford Act was swiftly approved, and worse yet, the demonstration had caught the attention of FBI head J. Edgar Hoover. In the years before, 1956, the FBI formalized their disruptive intelligence gathering activities, which they called their counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO. It was created specifically to target the Communist Party USA. In the early years of COINTELPRO, the FBI monitored the activities of civil rights activists, but through 1963, the FBI did little to actively repress the civil rights movement. But at the end of 1963, the FBI started to undertake extensive efforts to hound and discredit Martin Luther King Jr., which would continue until his death in 1968. In the summer of 1967, the FBI would then dramatically shift the intensity of their repression tactics on Black political organizations. With the war in Vietnam, with riots raging throughout the country, the Black Power movement became more nationalistic and more confrontational, with participants of these riots calling for armed resistance against the state. At the same time, Richard Nixon was running for president, and he positioned himself to capture conservatives who were deeply troubled by the social unrest. He wanted to attract as many of the white vote as he could, so he blended crime, urban riots with civil rights and student protests. Once he was elected president, he took an interest in the Black Panther Party. In March of 1968, J. Edgar Hoover expanded COINTELPRO against Black nationalists and other groups. In September of 1968, J. Edgar Hoover described the Black Panthers as the greatest threat to the internal security of this country. By 1969, the Panthers and their allies had become primary targets of COINTELPRO. The goals of this program was to prevent the unification of militant Black nationalist groups and to weaken their leadership, as well as discredit and reduce their support within the community. Assistant FBI Director William Sullivan later testified that the Bureau did not differentiate between Soviet spies and Black nationalist movements when deploying surveillance and neutralization tactics. At this time, the Panthers would have no idea of the depths of the actions of the FBI, and they had other issues. In October of 1967, John Frey of the Oakland Police Department pulled over Huey Newton. Now, there were conflicting reports of what happened next, but Officer Herbert Haynes testified that he responded to a request for backup, states that he asked Newton to step outside of the vehicle while Officer Frey informed him of his arrest. What followed was an physical altercation with Officer Frey and Newton, in which Newton was shot in the midsection and Officer Frey was shot and pronounced dead at Merriman College. Newton was then taken to Kaiser Hospital emergency room and arrested for murder. From the start, the Black Panther Party viewed the trial as a political contest rather than a legal proceeding. Around this time, the Panthers had created a weekly newsletter, and in the 6th issue, they issued the famous photo of Huey Newton sitting on a wicker throne on the front page with a bold headline that said, "Huey must be set free," after explaining that he'd been shot and arrested for the murder of Officer Frey. In the weeks leading up to his arrest, the Bay Area anti-war movement had experienced their own conflict with Oakland PD, and as resistance to the Vietnam War had intensified, white anti-war activists had gotten their own taste of police repression, and this only deepened their allegiances to the Panthers. They rejected the legitimacy of the war, the draft, and the government in general. As Newton awaited trial, the Free Huey Newton campaign developed allegiances with numerous student and anti-war activists and advanced the anti-imperialistic political ideology, which linked the oppression of anti-war protesters to the oppression of Blacks and the Vietnamese. September 8th, 1968, Newton was convicted of manslaughter in the killing of Officer Frey and sentenced to 2 to 15 years in prison. Many of the Panthers and their supporters were disappointed their efforts had not saved Newton, but the police wanted him executed for the murder of a police officer. Around this same time in 1968, the Panthers were essentially a local organization within Oakland, with a satellite chapter in Los Angeles. And although the Black Power movement had been brewing for years, the Panthers had not achieved national influence. That would all change April 4th, 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Now, this was probably the single most significant event in terms of how the Panthers were perceived in the Black community. Many African Americans seeked effective ways to help their community, and in turn, young Blacks flocked to the Panthers and their politics of self-defense. The Panthers did little recruiting. Instead, young activists from around the country contacted the party and asked how they could join. The party responded by opening Black Panther offices across the country. By 1969, the Panthers had a presence in almost every major city within the country and had a peak membership of over 5,000 members. Excuse me. With this explosion of growth, the Panthers created a tiered organizational structure to accommodate their rapid expansion. At the top was the governing body, which was called the Central Committee. It was comprised of Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, Frank Jones, and David Hilliard. The Central Committee was always based in the Bay Area. At the intermediate level were the state and regional chapters. These leaders were either chosen or self-selected and confirmed by the national headquarters. These local branches represented the Panthers on the ground level, and the rank and file members would report to the branch or chapter leaders, yeah. At the bottom were community workers and members of the Black community who desired to be Panthers but weren't official members. During this early period, Huey Newton did not directly participate in the building of the Black Panther Party. The task would be carried out by Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, David Hilliard, and the local leaders throughout the country. Because Newton was in prison, he became a device for recruitment and would achieve an almost mythical status among the Panthers and radical activists as a political prisoner. As the Panthers grew in membership and influence, so did pushback from the state. So the Panthers sought meaningful activities to serve their community, strengthen the party, and improve their public image. So they deployed community programs in early 1969. Inspired by Mao Zedong's advice to revolutionaries in the Little Red Book, they quickly became a cornerstone of party activities nationwide. The Panthers launched their first free breakfast program for children at St. Augustine's Episcopal Church in West Oakland. Soon, the program spread like wildfire, becoming their most important Panther activity. The Panthers claimed that they fed almost 20,000 children in 1969 school year, and these breakfast programs enjoyed widespread support within the community. Also, the free breakfast program shed light on the government's failure to address childhood poverty and hunger. The U.S. government in 1969 only spent $600,000 on breakfast program, and the government's own breakfast programs grew as the Panthers sponsored their own free breakfast programs. So by 1972, government-sponsored breakfast programs were feeding 1.8 million children in the United States. Despite these successes, COINTELPRO aimed to dismantle the Black Panther Party by targeting their social programs. No aspect of the Black Panthers was of greater concern to the FBI than the free breakfast program because it fostered widespread support for the Panthers' revolutionary politics. Hoover explained that one of the FBI's primary aims in their counterintelligence programs for the Panthers was to keep them isolated from moderate Blacks and the white community that supported it. He denounced the Panthers' social programs as a means of indoctrination and took extensive measures to undermine support for the Panthers' free breakfast program. The Black Panther Party's government repression took many diverse forms. All Panthers were subjected to police surveillance and harassment. Police officers regularly harassed both leadership and rank and file members. They issued tickets, and the members were often arrested for trumped-up charges. Court fees forced the Black Panther Party to allocate time and resources to legal matters rather than organizing social programs within the Black community. Between 1967 and 1969, the party paid more than $200,000 in bail money. This was money the Black Panther Party would never recoup. During the same period, 28 Black Panther members were killed. Subsequently, The Panthers had a siege mentality, unsure of who they could trust and when they might be killed. Despite this, the Black Panther Party's first 4 years were their most successful in terms of growth, membership, and prestige. The community perceived the Black Panther Party as a fearless Black radical political group who inspired African Americans to work for their people. However, and this is a big but, the seeds of internal conflict were already being planted even before Newton's release from prison in August of 1970. Newton was a free man, but Bobby Seale was in prison, and Eldridge Cleaver was in exile in Algeria. Newton and Cleaver, two of the central members of the Central Committee, fought increasingly over tactics and strategy. Newton wanted to downplay self-defense and police confrontation, and Cleaver wanted a violent revolution. Additionally, differences between the national headquarters and some of the state chapters also began to manifest. Friction between Oakland and the New York chapter. The New York chapter was the largest in the country, and the New York chapter had logged several complaints with national leadership while Newton was in prison. They assumed that when Newton was released, that the grievances would finally be addressed, but he only made tensions worse. New York leaders tended to agree with Cleaver that the party should emphasize military action, but the Panthers felt that their lack of representation within the Central Committee prevented the national leadership from appreciating their importance. Additionally, disagreements over how funds were being distributed fueled more inter-party strife. The Black Panther Party received funds from various sources, and the party chapters were required to release a certain percentage of income to the national headquarters for the organization. Increasingly, members of the Black Panther Party felt exploited by the national office. Black Panther members became concerned when reports surfaced of Newton and other leaders living in extravagant penthouses and homes. This caused local chapters to resent the fact that their funds were being misrepresented. All of these issues culminated in a splintering of the Panthers. The Panthers expelled several well-respected party members as well as the entire New York chapter, proclaiming them enemies of the people. Eldridge Cleaver and others argued that the Central Committee should have been informed prior to their expulsions, but any attempt to reverse the expulsions was ultimately unsuccessful. February 26, 1971, Newton and Cleaver agreed to discuss the party's differences during a local San Francisco television program. But once on the program, they promptly began to argue and expelled each other from the Panthers. Around the same time, the Black Panther Party decided to launch a campaign to run for mayoral and other local offices in Oakland. Newton presented the Central Committee with two bold ideas. The party would run Bobby Seale, who was now released from prison, for mayor of Oakland, and the party would close all chapters outside of Oakland and to redeploy all Panthers and their resources in Oakland to work on the campaign to consolidate power within the city. Newton believed that if the party gained political control over Oakland, it could promote the economic development plan that included promoting Black businesses and new human and social programs. The Central Committee was enthusiastic about the idea of acquiring local political power, but was initially divided over the necessity to dismantle the national organization. Bobby Seale led the opposition because he felt that the Panthers were already strong within Oakland and the national headquarters could lack the resources necessary to receive thousands of members from across the country on short notice. A large contingent of the Panthers from outside the Bay Area shared Seale's opinion. When the membership received their new directive from the Central Committee, many members refused to uproot their lives, and this caused a lot of Panthers to simply just walk away from the party. State chapters expressed serious misgivings with the Central Committee's new directive to close their respective party units because they were so tied to their respective communities. After weeks of debate, the committee decided to temporarily close all chapters and dismantle them over the course of a year. Afterwards, the members could take their new campaigning skills and governing experience and return to their cities and replicate the Oakland experience of gaining local power. Through 1972, early 1973, the Panthers converged on Oakland from all parts of the country. The BPP concentrated majority of their resources into Seale's mayoral bid and Elaine Brown's city council seat. They registered voters, distributed campaign literature, participated in campaign meetings, rallies all through 1972, 1973. Even though both races were very competitive, they lost. They lost both elections. It was bad. The impact of the electoral defeat was devastating to the Panthers because their members were so invested with time and effort into these campaigns. Shortly after the election, many Panther members resigned from the party out of sheer exhaustion and disillusionment. As a result, This resulted in a major exodus from the Panthers. 1973 elections proved to be a major misstep for Panther leadership. And according to Bobby Seale, the Panthers only had 500 members at this point. From this point on, the Panthers never recouped in size, prestige, or effectiveness, and they remained confined to the city of Oakland. 1974, Bobby Seale resigned, and several Panther members simply left the party right after. By 1980, the Panther membership had dwindled to just 27 members, and they would officially dissolve in 1982. The Black Panthers' rise was quick and dramatic, but their fall was slow and brutal. They grew out of a period of major political unrest and the excitement about the possibility of social change in the United States. But ultimately, a mix of government repression, inter-organizational politics, and mismanagement destroyed the Panthers. At their peak, they challenged police and protected the community from police brutality while providing the community with food, clothing, and transportation. Rather than attempting to integrate into the American society, the Black Panther Party wanted to change it and start a global revolution. Even decades after the ending of their organization, the Panthers' ideals have survived in the United States and continue to resonate with a new group of political activists. Thank you. Thank you. This is my talk. This has been fun. All right, I can get to my favorite part, answering questions.
All right. Oh, that was amazing. So yeah, questions, put them in the chat box or raise your hand. And yes. And so I do have perfect. How accurate was the movie Judas and the Black Messiah?
Wow, that's interesting. It actually was pretty accurate. They glossed over a lot of Fred Hampton's legal issues at the time and what he was actually in jail for, because he had robbed an ice cream truck and distributed that money, the money and the ice cream to local kids. And that's what he was in jail for at the time. But the part about William O'Neill and his treacherous behavior and his interaction with the FBI and the taking down of Fred Hampton, also the part about him giving them the map of the house, that's true. Now, there is a part in this movie where, where they insinuate that he poisons Hampton. Now, Hampton was found with some drugs in his system, but there's no indication that it was done by William O'Neill. And William O'Neill stayed on with the FBI and infiltrating the Panthers even long after that. He died after, I think, Eyes on the Prize came out a little bit later, and he saw how he looked, and then he committed suicide because it was a bad look.
And Jack Johansson asks, how did the events of the okay, let me start. How did the events with George Floyd affect the modern Panther movement?
Wow. I have to think that sort of thing has strengthened it, because there's been a large kind of nationalistic movement amongst the Black community and within, and while the new Panthers don't have that prestige or that real power that the original Panthers had, George Floyd really contributed to people looking for, kind of similar to when Martin Luther King was assassinated, just looking for people to how they can help their community and how they could do more and who's out there doing things. So that would push people to, Black Lives Matter as an organization, or the New Panthers, or however they felt like they could help their community.
Perfect. And Greta asks, how does the breakfast program line up time-wise with the Nation of Islam starting their food programs? Were they happening at the same time?
I think so. I actually kind of believe they might have predated the Panthers, because a lot of the Panthers' ideas came from Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. So, and I don't mention this in the story, but they had their 10-point program of what they want from the community. And that was inspired by Malcolm X's 10-point program without the religious aspect. So a lot of their ideas came from the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. And Bobby Seale talks about this now, that they consider Malcolm X to be an honorary member of the Panthers, even though he had passed away long before they were created.
Did Bobby Seale's run for mayor, though unsuccessful, set the stage for future African American candidates such as Lionel Wilson?
I like to think so. And I honestly, them running for mayor was not a terrible idea. The idea of attempting to try to reclaim political power within Oakland was a great idea. The bad idea here was the attempt to dismantle their national organization, because you can't put that genie back in the bottle. You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, as they say. So I think that idea of acquiring political power and the fact that the Panthers, who, while I talk about how positive their image was, even amongst the Black community, a lot within moderate Blacks thought they were crazy. They were on the fringe of society, because they were, viewed as a Black militant organization, and if it was controversial at the time. So the idea that even they could run for mayor and almost win, I had to think that viewed people and changed people's mind as far as Black candidates.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did the connection between disability rights activists push for the ADA and the Black Panthers come up in any of your research? Raven Forrest says she heard or they heard a little about it in the Doc Crip camp and would love to know more.
I didn't see much. One thing that does come up within the Panther reading, and I don't talk about this much, is that in the very beginning of the Panthers, they were a very male-centric, male-dominated organization, especially when they were following around the police. It was mostly guys who didn't have a whole lot to do, who were trying to find meaningful ways to help their community. But as they were looking to soften their image, they attracted a lot more women, especially when they were going through their free breakfast programs. They were offering free clinics. So that in that way, they became more open to different types of people, mostly black, but different types of people within the community, because they needed to show that they were not just some crazy militant organization, but that we were here for everybody.
Right. I have a personal, oh wait, no, we got Linda says she's thinking of Afeni Shakur and Black Panther LGBT.
Wow. Once again, it didn't really come up. And honestly, and I'm just speculating here, but because of how macho and how male-centric the organization was, I have to imagine that they would be against it, other than having women who within the organization that were, masculine like them, who were willing to do whatever, like they were willing to do whatever, follow around the police with guns or protect the community by any means necessary. So and I'm not sure, what Afeni Shakur's leanings, but if she was like, let's do it, then they would have embraced her wholeheartedly.
Right. That makes sense. And can I ask you a question that just was my curiosity? What did Bobby Seale do sort of after all of this played out, and after that initial sort of wave of stuff played out that you were discussing? Like, is Bobby Seale alive today?
Yes, he is 85 years old. He is still, and it's funny because a lot of the Panthers, I talked about how 28 of them passed away, Bobby Hutton and Fred Hampton and several other members, but Huey Newton was alive up until 84-ish, and he died, and Bobby Seale is still alive today. And to that credit, the FBI tried very hard to either dismantle the Panthers or just outright end up killing a lot of them. So the fact that they made this through, and that he's still alive, considering that he was one of the central members. Yeah, I if I've read correctly, I want to say that he lives a pretty quiet life these days. I haven't heard much from him other than him talking recently about Malcolm X and his influence on the Panthers, and how his death really, pushed him to start the organization.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. All right. Are there any more questions, we don't really have much time left. So I will let you all go. And thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And
This is awesome.
Yeah, it was really awesome. It was fascinating. All right. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.